What a great day this is in the city of Houston, Texas, the best city in the United States of America. I am so honored to serve as MC for this evening, and I'm so happy that the decision was made to move this event inside the Buffalo Soldiers Museum. Not that we would be under a lot of rain, but we'd be in danger of being carried away by mosquitoes. And perhaps we would have sweated through several outfits by now. But thank you so much. Tonight, we're going to learn not only about this tragic event that happened 105 years ago today, but we'll also learn new information on what has been something that's been very important, not only to those who researched this, but to the family members of those who were impacted by what happened 105 years ago in that 24th Infantry Regiment, and how it impacted our great city. The things that are being done over the last couple of years that we all are going to be interested to know about as well. We'll watch a short documentary produced by KHOU to ground us in to what this was all about, the events that happened 105 years ago, what led up to them. But most of all, we'll be dedicating this discussion this evening to the events of the last couple of years. This evening itself is history in the making. Tonight you will learn what the people on this stage, along with a few others, have done to advance the case for clemency for the soldiers who served in the 24th. The Buffalo Soldiers Museum is, along with Park Conservancy, they work really very hard, closely with Mayor Turner and his team, and the county commissioners, Rodney Ellis and Jack Cagle in Uptown Houston, to bring you tonight's program. Let me start by introducing to you those who are here this evening, starting with Captain Paul Matthews, who you may know as the founder of the Buffalo Soldiers Museum. Captain Matthews.
Good evening, everyone. It's a marvelous day the Lord sent. Show a little enthusiasm. Good evening. Yeah, my name is Captain Matthews. I'm the founder and the curator of the Buffalo Soldier National Museum. The museum opened January the 5th of 2001. We focus on and feature the Buffalo Soldiers, but in actuality, we give a perspective on the African-American military experience from 1770 to 2000, or from the Revolutionary War to the Persian Gulf War. If you talk about personalities from Christopher Sadix to Colin Powell. Our mission is to preserve, promote, and perpetuate the honor and legacy of the brave men and women who fought, bled, and died in defense of America. And we want the world to know that. And who were the Buffalo Soldiers? They were the peacekeepers in the American West. They built camps, forts, railroads, delivered the mail, strung telegraph wires, charted the land, chased down outlaws, Comancheros. As a matter of fact, without the Buffalo Soldiers, the westward movement would have been delayed 50 years. And now for my prepared remarks. And this will be brief. The Buffalo Soldier National Museum has researched, curated, and produced educational material and exhibitions on Camp Logan for 2 decades. The inaugural exhibit was curated on August 23, 2002 by Professor Angela Holder. In attendance on that historic day was Dr. Robert Haynes, author of A Night of Violence, and attorney Jason Hoth. Since that day, the museum has held an annual observance and exhibition. In reference to community activities, we have collaborated with local historians Louis Albach, Linda Gorski, Robert Morin, Patricia Pater, and others. We have provided research data for local and national media outlets, the Houston Chronicle, the New York Times, the Washington Post, History Channel, and international media like the London Times and the BBC. We have produced reenactments on Camp Logan featuring local and national actors Wayne DeHart, Melissa Thibodeau, and James Faulkner. We have provided lectures for local organizations, churches, schools, NAACP, and other institutions on Camp Logan. And let me close on this. On the 100th anniversary of the Camp Logan ride, we worked with the Veterans Administration to secure headstones for 3 troopers of the 24th Infantry Regiment, Sergeant Vida Henry, Private Watson and Private Strong, who were killed and buried without headstone. A newspaper headline at the time said, "Unwept, unhonored, and unsung. 2 Negro soldiers are buried." But on August the 23rd, 2017, 100 years later, the 9th and 10th Horse Cavalry Association, Professor Holder, and community leaders watched as the Moffett Point Marines unveiled a headstone with military designation for Sergeant Henry and Private Watson. No longer unwept, no longer unhonored, and no longer unsung. You didn't hear me. You heard me. And I close with the motto of the 10th Cavalry, ready and forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Matthews, for what this museum does to honor the Buffalo Soldiers, and in particular those from the 24th, sir. Memorial Park Conservancy operates and manages 1,100 acres of memorial parks, 1,500 acres on behalf of the city. The soldiers from the 24th were brought to Houston to guard the construction of the World War I Camp Logan. Shelley Arnold is the president and CEO of Memorial Park Conservancy, and they have worked closely with the Buffalo Soldiers Museum and others to make tonight's event possible. Shelley?
Thank you, Cambrella. Thank you, Captain Matthews. And thank you to all of our program partners here tonight. It's an important time. It's an important time in history. 105 years ago today, a tragedy happened, perhaps the greatest tragedy in Houston history, certainly a tragedy in the nation's history. And while it didn't take place in Memorial Park, it was tied to Memorial Park. The soldiers were here because of Memorial Park. And today we're at a juncture in history. It will likely be soon that the U.S. Army rules, or the military rules, on the case for clemency, thanks to the folks that you're going to hear from tonight that have been working on this, some for 45 years, some for 2 years, but they've all played important roles. Now, we at the Conservancy, we're not working on the case for clemency, but it's our job to tell the stories associated with Memorial Park. It's our job to curate the stories and to tell all the stories that are associated with Memorial Park, the good ones, the bad ones, the ugly ones. They're all important. It's important for us to understand where the park sits in national history and Houston history. And that's what we're going to hear about tonight. And so I thank you for the opportunity to be here, and thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And also for those of you online, thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And thank you, Buffalo Soldiers Museum, for hosting us this evening.
Thank you, Shelley. Earlier I mentioned the role that Commissioners Cagle and Commissioner Ellis have played in all of this. I'd like to introduce now William Taylor, who is the Director of Development and Infrastructure for Precinct 1 on behalf of Commissioner Ellis.
Good evening, everyone. I apologize for Commissioner Ellis' inability to be here this evening. He had to be in Commissioner's Court doing the people's work this evening. I'm especially pleased to be here because I'm the son of a Montford Marine, so this has a special meaning to me. Being born in 1954, segregation was something that I was born into and lived through, and this is really meaningful to me. And unfortunately, my father is not here, but I'm always mindful of the fact that we do live in a segregated, or we did live in a segregated society, and yes, we have come forward. But this is the reason we celebrate these occasions, to remember what has been, but more importantly, to what we have to look forward to. With that, I'm just going to read this resolution, and one of the reasons I'm going to read it, because I've been one of those staffers that's labored over these in the past, and no one's ever read them before, so you're going to have to bear with me as I read this out to all of you. Camp Logan, 105 years later. Whereas the members of the 24th Infantry's 3rd Battalion were among more than 350,000 black soldiers who served in segregated units during World War I, ready to give their lives for freedom not even yet afforded to black people in their home country. The unit's task was to guard the construction of the new Camp Logan training site, located in what is today Memorial Park. Whereas the soldiers endured severe, nonstop racial harassment from civilians, police, and fellow members of the military. After a black soldier was beaten and arrested for intervening in police mistreatment of a black woman, tensions boiled over and the soldiers mutinied. As Dr. Martin Luther King has famously said, quote, "A riot is the language of the unheard," end quote. We commemorate the unheard voices in the aftermath of the Camp Logan riots, as well as the incidents of mob harassment and beatings by white locals and Houston police that were all too frequent. And whereas by nightfall on August 23rd, 1917, some 21 people had been killed, including 11 civilians, every single member of the 24th Infantry was tried in military court without adequate representation or allowed due process to appeal their conviction. The second tragedy, an unfair trial, resulted in the hanging of 19 soldiers and the sentencing of 41 soldiers to life in prison. This ultimately led the United States military to change how it administers capital punishment. And whereas in the present progress is being made to exonerate these soldiers, collectively we refuse to forget this tragedy and know what we owe to those living in the present who are still dealing with similar yet differing oppressive conditions. And therefore be it resolved that as Commissioner of Harris County Precinct 1, we commemorate the legacy of the Camp Logan soldiers 105 years later and reflect on the freedoms that are still to be won for African Americans in this country.
Thank you. Now I can say that I've sat through the reading of one of those. Thank you. It was worth it. Now, representing the Honorable Mayor of the great city of Houston, I'd like to introduce Dr. LaShondra Jones, who is from the Mayor's Office of Veteran Military Affairs. Dr. Jones.
Thank you so much. I was actually honored to be asked to speak on behalf of our illustrious Mayor, Sylvester Turner, who sends his regards for not being here. But I have some history with working on this. A couple of years ago, when I was a part of the Armed Services group of the NAACP, Attorney Clyde Lemon brought this to our a group around 2015 and said this was something that they had been working on for years. And so we were so happy to be a part of this and to do our small part to be a part of this. For the many years that Mr. Holt, Dr. Holder has been working on this, and we also want to also again welcome back Mr. Holt to the city of Houston, who's here from New Jersey. Thank you for your tireless work working on this for your uncle, who's a direct descendant of one of the 13 that was hung back at Camp Logan, and also Dr. Holder, who's also a descendant as well. But I do my workouts at Memorial Park. And somehow, some way, when I'm running, I'm walking, and I'm tired, I'm ready to stop, but somehow I get a second burst of wind. Because it's on those grounds where those men once stood, once marched. So I'm able to move a little bit further, and I know when I'm getting close to that water fountain, I look down and I see that marker of Camp Logan, where my ancestors are. Those men whose shoulders I stand on as a member who has served in the Marine Corps and the military armed forces. And I was also a part of the unveiling of the headstones back in 2017 when the headstones were unveiled. I'm so honored to be a part of history with the Mumford Point Marina Association. So again, on behalf of the City of Houston, we're looking forward to hearing that the clemency is going to be granted, because we already know it's going to happen. But on behalf again of the Mayor of City of Houston, Mayor Sylvester Turner, thank you all for inviting us, and we look forward to more collaborations with the students of South Texas School of Law, with the professors of South Texas School of Law, NAACP, and also the family members who continue to work on behalf of getting the clemency on behalf of these great men of the 24th. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. It is now my pleasure to introduce the City Council member for the district that encompasses the Memorial Park area. That is Abby Kamen. Sorry, Abby.
Good evening, everyone. Growing up down the road from Memorial Park, I never knew of the tragedy and miscarriage of justice that unfolded on this day 105 years ago. And it's so important that we do everything we can to support the Conservancy, the Buffalo Soldiers Museum, and our city in ensuring that children grow up knowing exactly how the 24th Regiment were not only treated, imprisoned, but murdered. It is part of Houston's history, and I think it's important to note that at a time when there are dangerous efforts in our country right now to whitewash our past and pretend that uncomfortable and painful things never happened, and I'm talking about banning books and restricting curriculums. The work that the NAACP, South Texas College of Law under Dean Barry, and so many others, including all of our panelists that you'll hear from, all of the work they are doing is more important than ever. This clemency effort to clear the names of 110 men who served our country is yeoman's work, and I am captivated, as I know many of you are, by how meaningful this is. I know he couldn't be here tonight, and Dr. Jones, thank you for representing him, but I wanted to thank Mayor Turner for his continued efforts and constant stand for what is right and what is just. And Director Allen, who you'll hear from representing our Parks Department, is an important part of that work, as is Director Dembo and others under the Mayor's administration. I also want to recognize the Memorial Park Conservancy. Shelley, you and your team have done such a beautiful job ensuring that this tradition of remembrance and dialogue continues for generations to come. I wasn't planning to do this, but with so much talk about the honor of serving our country, if we could take a moment, and if you're a veteran, could you please stand? Thank you to each of you for your service, and to the Buffalo Soldiers Museum for always honoring that tradition as well. A special thank you really quickly to Mr. Holt, Professor Holder, to all of the descendants of those who served that are with us today. As a council member representing not only Memorial Park and the neighborhood of Camp Logan, but Freedmanstown and Olivewood, all which are important pieces of the struggle for civil rights in our country, I want to thank the descendants tonight for their perseverance and making sure that we know the truth. So to those here tonight, either in person, I know there's a lot of folks online as well, the descendants have done their work. South Texas College of Law is doing its work. NAACP is doing its work. Memorial Park Conservancy, and the list goes on. But the responsibility now falls to all of us as well to make sure that the story continues to be told. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member. And as she mentioned earlier, the Director of the Houston Parks and Recreation Department is here. Please welcome Kenneth Allen.
Thank you, Kimbrough. I just want to take a moment for the fathers, the soldiers, the countrymen, the brothers that lost their lives in 1917, 105 years ago. I want to take a few seconds of silence to recognize them and in their honor. To the reason why we're here today, I stand here full of emotion, knowing where we were, moving to where we are now, just recognizing the change of events and the transformation of Memorial Park with the help of many. I stand not only emotional, but I stand proud. I stand proud to be a part of this process, to be a part of this recognition, and to be a part of the Houston Parks and Recreation Department, serving as a director. I have the distinct pleasure of overseeing 382 parks throughout our system, and they actually all play a vital role in community and in the people that they actually serve. So, when you think about parks and you think about open spaces from the lens of recreation, you just think about play, you think about activities, you think about events. I can honestly say standing here is one of the most iconic moments in events throughout my 32-year career, to honor the past, but yet move forward to the future. When I think about the role that we have as a department across the city, bringing people together, building communities, honoring the past, recognizing the future. In many cases, people do not understand the impact of open space, of recreation, and of services. When you look at parks like Memorial Park, Emancipation Park, Moody Park, Sam Houston Park, and many more, there's a history, a very distinct history with each one of them. And part of that history, we are recognizing today of Memorial Park. We get over 14 million visitors a year at this park from over 170 different zip codes. They're there to have fun, but to have a spot to recognize the history and the tragic things that happen from an educational standpoint and a developmental standpoint is truly amazing. So the efforts tonight and moving forward, we'll talk about that history. We'll expose that history, but yet we'll serve as a boilerplate from where we've been to where we're going, to where we're going, to where we will be. I've always been told to understand where you're going, you have to understand where you've come from. That's true here tonight. So I want to thank everybody involved in this process. The Memorial Park Conservancy, certainly. The Buffalo Soldiers Museum, National Museum, certainly. Mayor Turner, without a doubt, a supporter of parks, history, equity, diversity, and inclusion. We have massive efforts happening today to make our parks and our spaces more equitable. This is all part of that, in my opinion. And I want to thank Councilmember Abby Kamen for being so supportive and ready to join the cause and to help make a positive impact. So thank you. It's going to be a wonderful evening. I'm looking forward to the rest of the show.
Thank you, Kenneth. Right now, we want to pause for just a moment for you to be able to watch this short video, and then we'll come back and we'll start speaking with our panelists.
My name is John H. Crooker, and I am Criminal District Attorney, Harris County, Texas. I was informed of the mutiny and riots of the Negro soldiers of the 24th Infantry about 9 o'clock on the night of its occurrence.
About 3:30 p.m., we heard that Corporal Baltimore of our company had been shot by police officers. All the boys said, "Let's go get the man that shot Baltimore."
One grabbed me and pushed me out in front of him with his gun and started shooting at me. Earl seemed dazed and couldn't get out from under the wheel, and when this Negro shot me, they all seemed to go crazy, started shooting Earl. I fell flat in the ditch and lay there as if dead, and they let me alone.
Get out! This is my house! You ain't got no right to be here!
I think we're gonna have trouble tonight.
What kind of trouble, Sergeant?
Major trouble.
All right,
And this was just the beginning of a night of terror, all but forgotten in the history of Houston. A night in which some 16 Houstonians, including 5 police officers, lost their lives. 5 soldiers were also killed. The riot resulted in martial law in Houston and ultimately led to the largest military trial in U.S. history.
The thing that always fascinates me is that nobody knows the story, or very few people do.
It's a fascinating and tragic story, born of a climate of racial tensions that were embedded in law. This is the story of what has come to be known as the Camp Logan riots, when toward the end of a long Houston summer, a group of African-American soldiers declared a mutiny on the bayou. Houston, Texas, 1917. Population 130,000, including 30,000 African Americans, the largest black population of any Texas city. Houston covered a total of 32 square miles on either side of Buffalo Bayou, and the town was on the threshold of a period of rapid growth. The citizens shared a sense of excitement about Houston's future. With 13 banks, 365 factories employing 10,000 workers, and annual exports of more than 3 million bales of cotton, Houston proudly claimed to be the largest inland port cotton market in the world. White and black citizens lived in 2 separate worlds. In fact, it was the law. Black Houstonians had their own saloons and restaurants, 4 movie houses, 3 weekly newspapers, and a separate professional baseball team called the Houston Black Buffaloes.
It was a very, very difficult time and place to live, never mind work and recreate and raise families. And this riot, this mutiny, is a manifestation of those social conditions.
After the Civil War, most southern states passed what were known as Jim Crow laws, creating separate arrangements for blacks and whites in schools, on public transportation, in restaurants, hotels, theaters, public parks, even doctors' offices. Some form of these laws remained in Houston and throughout the South until the early 1960s. It is difficult for most of us to imagine what things were like way back when. But Thelma Scott Bryant, Hazel Young, and Henrietta Wells lived through it.
The white man expected you to stay in your place, they say, and we knew how to stay in our place rather than, cause a lot of trouble. That was just the way it had to be at that time. You got out your place, well, then they put you back in it.
No matter how intelligent you were, if you were black, you didn't get any kind of recognition because white people resented smart niggas, as they say. Yeah. In fact, they went out of the way to show you didn't have any, they didn't respect you. I thought I was supposed to sit on the back of the bus. That was a part of growing up in the South. You knew your place. and your place was in the back of the bus.
I resented the segregation on the streetcars because when I came back from college, I resented it more. I had to get up and give the workers, the street workers and the construction workers, my seats. And they were dirty people. I thought they needed a bath. They didn't smell good. But I had to get up and give them my seat. And I didn't like the fact that I couldn't try on clothes. I couldn't try on shoes. I couldn't try on hats. I might buy something and take it home and it didn't look right, but I couldn't return it. I had to keep it. There were so many things like that that were demeaning.
I think most people today honestly have a lack of appreciation for how truly awful race relations were at this time period. You're talking about the very depths of white supremacy, which were in many ways worse than slavery. This was a volcano ready to erupt.
The police were pretty tough in that area. They loved to chase prostitutes, crap shooters, and they'd had a tendency to shoot at blacks to scare them and to show their virility.
The new reform-minded mayor had begun some major changes in the Houston Police Department. He appointed a new chief, Clarence Brock, who had been the park superintendent and had no law enforcement experience, a move that met with strong resentment and resistance on the force.
What Brock was trying to do was professionalize the police, trying to bring discipline, trying to make officers look like police in terms of their dress and demeanor. And I mean, they just laughed at him, and he didn't have the force of personality to do it.
On the surface, things seemed relatively peaceful, but there was an undercurrent of prejudice that could flare up in an instant, and sometimes with overwhelming force. And into this complex racial climate came the men of the 24th Regiment.
At the beginning of the war, the U.S. government established a number of National Guard training sites across the United States. There were 16 of them. And the cities bid for them because they realized that this would be a great deal of federal money, construction money, and all coming into the communities.
Houston leaders pursued their share of this business, and the Army agreed to build a training base for National Guard troops being recalled to active duty, a base to be known as Camp Logan on the eastern edge of what is now Memorial Park. To guard the construction site, the Army decided to use members of the 24th Infantry, also known as the Buffalo Soldiers, a name given them in respect for their skill and bravery by the Native Americans whom they fought against in Texas and Indian territories. They had earned this respect again and again through over 4 decades of service, including the pursuit of Pancho Villa in Mexico under General Blackjack Pershing, and serving in Cuba with Teddy Roosevelt during the Spanish-American War.
The 4 Buffalo Soldier regiments, the 9th and 10th Cavalry, and the 24th and 25th Infantry, they served out west. You know, they built camps, forts, railroads, delivered the mail, strung telegraph wires, charting the land. They did all of these types of things. I mean, without the Buffalo Soldiers, the westward movement would have been delayed 50 years.
Corporal Jesse Moore of Louisiana was among the black soldiers sent to Houston. Angela Holder is his great-niece.
And I was about 6 years old, and I saw this picture in my Aunt Lovey's house, and I said, well, who is that? She said, that's my brother Jesse. And I said, well, what happened to him? I wanted to know all these whys and wins.
Later in junior high school, Angela Holder saw a picture in an American history book that prompted her to ask more questions about her great-uncle.
One thing I remember my mother was saying that he may have been in the service before, and that he was a bugler, and that he wanted to go back into the service, but his mother didn't want him to do it, that there might have been some type of premonition that something bad was going to happen to him.
24-year-old Private T.C. Hawkins was from a large family and grew up in North Carolina. He was one of 7 children, the grandson of a minister. He was raised in a close-knit religious family.
My aunt told me that my uncle was a great person, that he was a really super guy. And you had a group of colored soldiers, as they preferred to be called, that were proud to serve their country, that were proud to participate in the military.
And when the soldiers came, they came to Antioch. All the young ladies and the little ones too were admiring those soldiers from Chicago who came to our church. I was 12 years old looking up at soldiers who were looking better than anybody I had ever seen. I was trying to be seen too. Those are our heroes.
We did not know any soldiers personally, except the ladies were all trying to marry a soldier. I have a soldier boyfriend.
While the black community was excited, many white Houstonians were alarmed to hear black troops were stationed in Houston. Outside the black community, the soldiers quickly encountered a level of disrespect and discrimination they had seldom experienced before.
Well, to send soldiers from the north to a deeply southern ingrained town was just like waving a red flag. They resented those soldiers who looked better and had more evidently on the ball than the white people did. It was a situation that was tense.
So you have a town like Houston, it's more southern than western, now, although we consider it to be in the west. But the attitude at the time, the Jim Crow laws, the segregation, all of these things were going on, and you mix that with proud black men in blue uniforms, and you have a tragedy waiting to happen.
There were racial incidents from the very beginning. And that is to say that this came from various parts of the community. The white construction workers gave them a difficult time.
Private First Class T.C. Hawkins, Drew Brenner Beck, attorney, assistant dean of South Texas College of Law researcher, Kathy Burnett, associate dean, South Texas College of Law researcher and advocate, Captain Paul Matthews from the Buffalo Soldiers Museum, and Shelley Arnold from the Memorial Park Conservancy make up our panel. Bishop James Dixon could not be here tonight, represented in our audience by Nicholas Little from the NAACP, a board member with them, and is the Armed Services and Veterans Affairs Chair. Give our panel a big round of applause, please. Professor Holder, I want to start with you. You're the great niece of Jesse Moore, and he was one of the first 13 soldiers to be executed. And I'm taken aback by how quickly all of this happened. This happened on this date 105 years ago, and on December 11th, 13 men were hung. So it didn't take very long for that level of justice to be applied. Talk a little bit about, for the folks who are here, about him. Who was he?
Good evening. My uncle was 27 years old at the time of his death, unmarried, and he proudly served his country. He started out as a kid. He was a young kid. His uncle, Alex Moore, was his guardian, and he had to get permission. At that time, if you were underage, you had to get permission from your parents or a guardian to join up, and he did. And he wanted to go back in after he had done his first tour. He was working for a while, but he wanted to go back, and his mother had a premonition that something bad was going to happen to him. She did not want him to go back. But young black men at this time, to escape the oppression of Jim Crow segregation, they joined the military. And they got out of the South, went to exotic places like the Philippines, and he served there in the Philippines and came home, and he served with General Pershing, eating dust in Mexico, looking for Pancho Villa. And so when the men get the notice that they were going to come to Houston to guard Camp Logan, they were excited because they were going to see girls, get home cooking. They were just really happy to be here.
This whole process now that you were able to find out what happened to him. How did that impact you? How did it impact your family and get your family focused on trying to find some level of justice?
Uncle Jesse was one of many siblings, and when he died, the family did not get the remains. There was a mystery, 70 years, 70 years. It was solved when I went to graduate school at Southern University, and there was a book written by Dr. Robert Haynes, A Night of Violence, the Houston Riot of 1917. And this book allowed me to find him. He was buried here in Houston, Texas. The story that was told in the family that he was killed here in Houston and that he was buried here in Houston. But the research, he was buried at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio. So when I was able to find him, he had one sibling left. There had been numerous attempts by family members over the years prior to 1987 to get information, but there was no Freedom of Information Act in 1963 when his younger brother went to Washington to get information. And so here, with that particular discovery in 1987, the lone sibling was able to put that to rest that her brother had been found.
Since what you've been able to find out about him and the challenges going forward, what have you done? What has pushed you to try to get this clemency, and how have you worked toward that?
The aunt that I learned about him, Lovey, was very instrumental in my life, and the only time I ever saw her sad was when she talked about her brother. And I made up my mind at 6 years old that I was going to find him. And a few months after she told me about his death and they didn't know where he was, she died. So that has been my mission, to get something done for these men. Well, I started out just for him, but as the research grew, I learned about these other men. And so I've adopted all of these men. They're all my family. And I want to see something done for them. Whatever's done, it's not going to bring them back, but at least give their souls some peace. Speaking at historical events like this, doing interviews with news outlets. I was on your show 5 years ago when we did the 100-year observation of the Camp Logan Mutiny Houston Riot of 1917. Working with documentaries, education does a lot. And when you educate people, you get a lot of support. And that is what I've been contributing, trying to educate people on this event, why it's necessary to get some justice for these men.
Mr. Holt, I want to ask you about your descendant. You are Private First Class Thomas C. Hawkins was your great uncle. Talk about, if you will, a little bit about him, let people know who he was, his background. It should be on. Yeah.
Oh, it's working.
Yeah.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank the Buffalo Soldiers National Museum for allowing me all these many years to come down and fellowship with you, particularly Captain Matthews and Professor Holder, and enjoy the fellowship here in Houston. And then, of course, at this point in time, with my new friends at the Conservancy, and I think you're doing some wonderful, fantastic work, and I want to thank you for the privilege of sharing the stage with all of this august panel that's here. As is my typical way of starting, when I talk about my uncle, I always acknowledge the other 12 individuals that were executed with them by calling their names. And, you know, as African Americans, we are ancestral people. And I have to acknowledge first PFC Thomas Coleman Hawkins, Sergeant William C. Nesbitt, Corporal Jesse Moore, Corporal Larnon J. Brown, Corporal James Wheatley, Corporal Charles Baltimore, PFC William Breckenridge, PFC Carlos Snodgrass, Private Ira B. Davis, Private James Divins, Private Frank Johnson, Private Risley W. Young, Private Pat McWhorter, and today they are not forgotten. So I thank all of you for not forgetting them. Today they are remembered. To tell you a little bit about, thank you. Thank you. To tell you a little bit about Thomas Coleman Hawkins, I have to begin at the end of his journey. Now that's significant because he lived a very strong Christian life. He didn't just find religion at the point of his execution. His grandfather, who was a preacher, instilled in him certain values. So he was a strong Christian. And at the point of his demise, his ignominious demise by the hanging lasso, he stood strong. And in fact, he was so strong that even though he was convicted for a crime he didn't commit, he stood at that point in time and forgave his executioners. Now, I don't know if I could be that strong. I don't know if I have a heart like that. But that's his background. That's who he was. And that's the example that he set. You can take my body. The body can fall, but the spirit will rise. You can't take the spirit. So that's how he lived. And to go into some more detail about him personally, he was an educated person, because when I read his letters that were sent to his parents, beautiful prose, he was a poet, he wrote some songs, he was very articulate, he talked about his journey in the service, he talked about what it was like in one of his letters to fight in the Philippines, and what it was like to fight people that resembled him, and how he felt about that. So now the trend is to discuss diversity, equity, and inclusion, but you have to put that on a scale and hold it in juxtaposition to the tone of the times. The tone of the times, the Jim Crow era, the white skin privilege era that did not acknowledge African Americans to some extent, even as human beings. And if you think about it, the time when this incident occurred, and I'm not going to call it a mutiny, I'm not going to call it an insurrection. I'll just call it an incident, and I know that Drew has some things that she's going to say about that a little bit later. You have to hold it in context and put it in context. So Thomas Coleman Hawkins, North Carolina, born country strong. So, I'm a city boy, but he was country strong. So he goes into the Army based on a letter that was sent to him from his older brother, who was already in the 10th Cavalry. And let me just explain one thing to you, if you indulge me. The same issues that we're confronted with today were the issues that he was confronted with at that point in time. He went in the Army based on a letter that came in September of 1914. He joined the Army in October of 1914. He gave him instructions as to what he had to do and how to get there. But the same issues, economics, come join the Army because you will get paid. An issue that we're struggling now with as a community and as a people. Medical care. Come join the Army now and you will get medical care. I'm reading this letter. The same issues that we're confronted with now. So he joins the Army. And what did his big brother tell him in his letter? Stay in the Army. I'm about to go to the Philippines. Get in here soon enough so you can come with me. But when we get out, we're going to go into business together. Wow. Think about that. 1914. Same issues, same kinds of challenges that we're faced with today.
What is it that has given you the impetus? I can tell by just hearing how he was and you're being able to read his letters and know what kind of guy he was. What is it that has propelled you and given you the energy to pursue the clemency and the kinds of things you're trying to do to get justice for him after the fact?
When I first came to Texas many years ago, my parents in particular were concerned that I wasn't coming back. They thought that addressing and unearthing some of these things would present a problem. And although there were some challenges, I have always felt like Houston was a second home to me, and San Antonio for the time that I spent there as well. The inspiration of someone who can walk the walk, talk the talk, and my mother had a saying that I'm sure a lot of people in here have heard. You got to be able to get down to the nitty-gritty when the rubber hits the road. So when it was his time, I look at it as more of an inspiration than anything. And one of the reasons why I'm a lawyer now is because of that inspiration. And never let it be said that any of us, particularly those of us that are on this stage, do not care about other human beings. It's up to us to address the issues that are felt by all humankind, regardless of where it takes us. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Enough, absolutely.
Enough.
So you've been working on this for a long time.
Correct.
The woman sitting next to you has been working on it a little bit less, but certainly no less important a role. Professor Brenner Beck, you've been working on the clemency initiatives for all of this. This has been for the last 3 years. Can you tell us what's happened in that process and where that stands now?
Yeah, I will if my microphone is working. Is it working?
Yeah.
No.
Just hold it close. It's working, just hold it close.
It is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just hold it close.
So I was called by a friend of mine, Professor Jeffrey Korn, at the South Texas College of Law, and he had been approached by Clyde Lemon of the Houston branch of the NAACP, asking if something could be done about this long-standing case. This was the largest court-martial in U.S. history. It's actually the largest criminal case in U.S. history. And that's just the first trial, which tried 68 soldiers for their roles in what happened in Houston on the 23rd of August. Jeff called me and asked me if I could take this on as a project. And I said yes, not knowing 3 years later I would still be working on it. The first year, it involved reading the records of trial for all 3 cases, which amounts to over 6,000 pages of record. And not only the record, but all of the other records that we discovered as part of our research efforts. The clemency actions that occurred in the 20s, the actions of the NAACP since 1917 forward. And then I talked to Dean Burnett about involving the students at South Texas College of Law in the clinics to help humanize each individual soldier and talk about where they came from, what their education was, how they had served their country. Some of these soldiers had served their country, one of them in Cuba with Teddy Roosevelt on San Juan Hill. You know, many of these soldiers served in the Philippine insurrections, far from home, serving their country. The summer before this happened, these soldiers participated in the punitive expedition against Pancho Villa, who had attacked the United States. So these soldiers were combat hardened, they were trained well, and they were disciplined soldiers. And they were sent here to guard the construction of Camp Logan. And we all saw what happened in the events. We had a meeting with the regional NAACP representatives, and I told them that I didn't know what we were going to find as we went through the records, but at the very least, we would have a much broader understanding of what historically happened in 1917. And as we went through the process of evaluating the records and evaluating the courts, I was able to involve many, many volunteers across the country. So my co-author on the petition is also a military retiree. He is a conflict historian. So he made sure that we provided a very rich context of what it was like for African Americans in Texas and what it was like for African American soldiers in Texas. And we detailed at least 5 incidents of racial violence directed against soldiers in Texas since 1900.
And you didn't mention that you're retired military, and that gives you a little background as well.
I am both Professor Korn and myself are retired Army officers and JAG officers. So we had the expertise in military law that prior people who had reviewed these issues did not have. And we had the historical knowledge provided by my co-author to make sure that what we were presenting to the Army was 100% accurate.
Why did it take so long? You talked about the NAACP started to push this many, many years ago, shortly after this happened. Why has this process taken as long as it has?
Because I think the reviews were done in the light of the racist attitudes that existed and permeated our society in the early 1900s and continued through our struggle with civil rights until today, and continuing until today. So I think you had the NAACP, not only did they get involved in the clemency actions for the soldiers who were tried in the second and third trials, but they also funded a habeas petition in the 30s for the soldiers who were incarcerated at Fort Leavenworth. They petitioned 4 different presidents for clemency for these soldiers. So it's been a long-term project for the NAACP to support reevaluating what happened here and support an assessment of what justice should mean when you look at these cases.
So you look for wins along the way, something to keep you motivated to keep going. I know that there was an historical marker that was able to be placed. What role did that play in helping this process along?
Well, we were able to put together the petition, and we presented the petition at the South Texas College of Law for clemency to the General Counsel of the Army in October of 2020. And as part of that, we had also worked with the VA to talk about the headstones for the soldiers who were buried at the Fort Sam Houston National Cemetery. And there are 17 of the 19 executed soldiers are currently buried in the cemetery at Fort Sam Houston. Now, they weren't buried there originally. They were originally buried on the banks of Salado Creek near the execution site with no grave markers. They had the only identification of their bodies were their names placed in a glass bottle and placed in the coffins with them. So in the 30s, the Army was consolidating the burials, and they moved the graves very quietly to the National Cemetery at Fort Sam Houston. And ironically, moving these soldiers to the post portion of the National Cemetery integrated that cemetery. So the VA was very involved from the very beginning, and my co-author, John Haymond, and Lieutenant Colonel, who was in the Undersecretary of the Army's office, Jamie Dobson, became very interested in commemorating what the events that happened in 1917 and explaining why the headstones for these soldiers are very different from the other headstones in the cemetery. They bear only the names of the soldiers and their dates of death. They don't bear their ranks, they don't bear their units or their service campaign credits.
To this day?
To this day. So the VA became very interested in explaining the historical context of what happened. And earlier this year, in February 2022, they installed a historical wayside marker at the cemetery at Fort Sam Houston. And they dedicated the marker, and they had the Deputy Secretary of the VA officiate at the ceremony. Jason spoke. They had the Undersecretary of the Army attend the ceremony. We had the Buffalo Soldiers of Bexar County attend. So it was a very meaningful exercise of public history. And we were able to help the VA to capture the 3 things that they wanted to capture in the marker, which was the service that these soldiers gave to their nation, the unfairness that occurred in their trials, and then the lasting legacy that resulted from their trials, which was the issuance of General Order Number 7, which prohibited the execution of any sentence of death prior to it being reviewed by the Judge Advocate General. And that went forward into the 1920 Articles of War, which created the first military appellate process in military justice in the United States.
So, Dean Burnett, and I saw you shaking your head a lot that was going on there. The whole project, the Innocence Clinic that you have there, what role has that played in helping to uncover some of the things? I noticed, by the way, Professor Brenner Beck, that note, you have a big notepad there. I'm going to ask you more about that in just a second because I'm intrigued about all that's there. But Dean Burnett, talk about the Innocence Clinic and what role it's played in trying to dig up as much as you can to help propel this clemency process.
Thank you, Grimble. Well, the Innocence Clinic is designed to take law students, usually in their second or third year of school, and have them research some of the root causes of wrongful convictions. We know that people are convicted wrongfully for a variety of reasons. So we were taking that lens from 3 years ago in contemporary society and applying it back in time to 1917. So, for example, students read all 3 trials. As Drew said, 6,000 pages. Normally, I think y'all know, you can't get students sometimes motivated to read 6,000 pages of anything. But these trials were so compelling and inconsistent one from the other. The testimony wasn't always the same in each trial. The eyewitness identification wasn't always the same in each trial. The profiles of the individual soldiers, meaningful, rich work that Drew directed the students to perform. So we were going back, contacting family members, looking at military records, letters home. Who said what? Let us get a picture of who these young men were. Some of the soldiers were hardened veterans, and some were kids straight off the farm, maybe been in service 6 months or less. So the students did a variety of things, individual research into individual soldiers, but also a systemic look. What was wrong with the trial? Looking at it through the lights of the 2020s, one lawyer for 60-something defendants?
Wait a minute, say that again.
One lawyer for 60.
Who wasn't a lawyer.
Oh, who was a law professor, which isn't the same as being a lawyer. I'm saying that as a law professor, right? So we had one law professor representing 60-something defendants in the first trial. You have all the problems of cross-racial identification, for example. In the rain, in twilight, of men in uniform with a similar haircut and often of a similar age. But I could say, that man was there in one trial. That man wasn't there in another trial. That gripped the students. So the quality of lawyering, the lack of evidence that's really probative. I couldn't tear the students away. As a matter of fact, even after they finished the clinic and they got their grade, they kept working on the case and even found their way into this hundreds of pages, clemency petition.
So for those who don't know, how does a clemency petition work?
If you have a pardon, if you're asking the president for a pardon, that simply removes the punitive aspects of the conviction. It doesn't take away the historical fact of the conviction. It simply restores civil liberties. Clemency, if granted by the Secretary of the Army, completely overturns the convictions for all these soldiers. And that is what we have asked the Secretary of the Army to do, is to overturn the convictions for all 110 soldiers who were convicted and to restore their characterization of service to honorable. So at that point, they will be entitled to normal gravestones in the cemetery at Fort Sam Houston.
Doesn't it seem just a little odd Captain Matthews, doesn't it seem just a little odd that we'd be fighting to just get to the point where you can get a headstone that's got a name on it and got something more than just the fact that they died?
Yes, we made a commitment and we did it. I think our objective here at the museum was to educate the public, to develop programs and processes, reenactments, and now it's in the hands of the attorneys. And I think they're doing an outstanding job on getting that done. So we're definitely looking forward to assisting and doing whatever we need to do to move the process forward.
What role does the Conservancy play in all of this in terms of support for all of it that's going on, Shelley?
So the Conservancy, as I mentioned, manages most of the Memorial Park on behalf of the City of Houston, and we're a private nonprofit. And we are making improvements to the park. We're designing improvements to the park that reflect the ecological history of the park, the cultural history of the park. This is led by our design firm, Nelson Bird Woltz. We're doing these improvements with our partners at the City of Houston, the Parks Department, at Uptown Development Authority, at the Kinder Foundation. There's another piece of what we do. We tell the stories of the park, and that's what I was mentioning earlier. So we curate the stories of the park for Houstonians to know and understand, and for the nation to know and understand. Memorial Park is a significant park, not just locally, not just regionally, but nationally. And this is one of the main reasons, because of the presence of Camp Logan, because of this story, because of the role in this we play, Houston. Camp Logan Memorial Park play in Houston military history. But our job, one of our jobs, is to bring forward these narratives and to do this with our partners and with Houstonians, and ultimately with the input of Houstonians. And really, that's what we're doing.
Professor Holder, I can't imagine that any more could be done than what your families have done in pushing this forward. What is your attitude right now as a family? And I'll talk with you as well, Mr. Holt, in terms of how far this is going, the challenge of pushing it even further, feeling like you may be close to a finish line, whatever that line may be, or maybe it's not a finish line, but just another line.
I made a promise to my uncle. I made a visit October 25th, 2001. I was supposed to have gone September 13th, but 9/11 happened, and the fort was closed off until it could be properly secured. And when I did go to the cemetery, and I talked to my uncle, I said, "Old man, this is not right. This should not have happened to you. I'm going to do something for you." I saw the other headstones of the men who had been executed, and I anointed each of those headstones. And I told them, "I'm going to do something for you all. I don't know what, I don't know how, but I'm going to make this right." And God has been on this mission with me. My family is very supportive on this, and we're really excited about something being done. And so now I wait and keep the faith.
I love it. I think that progress in this regard is sometimes fast, it's sometimes slow, but it's always incremental. And 105 years later, truth crushed the earth still rises. We're still talking about it, and we're going to continue to talk about it, and we're going to continue to address this until the inequities and the injustices are righted. So if you're asking me, I love it. I love to see what everybody's doing. I love to participate in the clemency petition. It's one of the greatest things for me to happen, because over the years we've had a number of, I don't want to call it false starts, but we've had a number of different things that have taken place that have not gotten the result that we've wanted. And I actually have the privilege of, I brought the letter that our family submitted anyway in support of the clemency petition as per the request, and I'll just read something to you. Let me see. These executions were shrouded in secrecy and concealed from the public until after the ignominious lassos of death had claimed them as their victims. Not only were they not afforded the full protections of military law, but they were not accorded a modicum of human compassion which would have allowed them to say goodbye to their families and loved ones. So if you're asking me how I feel, I love it. I'm just ecstatic. Whatever happens, you know, we're in the fight, and we're doing something, and even if it takes another 100 years or another 2 months, the fact that we're doing something is satisfaction.
How important is it to keep this in the forefront of conversation about what's going on, both from the standpoint of you as descendants of those men who were executed, but also from the standpoint of those who are fighting for the memories and the reputations of those who were taken?
Well, it's very important because from at least my involvement, and one of the things that other attorneys had said is that the time was not right, that there had to be a time in the nation when what we needed to be done would be accepted. And whatever you want to attribute that to, there's a lot of incidents that have taken place over the last couple of years that have raised the nation's consciousness to a certain level. You can't see the picture if you're in the picture. So sometimes something like the pandemic causes everybody to step back and take another look at who we are. So if ever the time was right, I think the time is right now. So right now is right now.
I think another startling piece for me is that the execution catches everybody's attention, that 17 executed, hanged soldiers. Other soldiers served 50, 60 life sentences, right? 50 years, 60 years, 40 years, a life sentence in a carceral state. That is still true, even today, for people who are wrongfully convicted. So it's another reason, I think, to keep the story fresh. Not just because the death penalty was imposed on some, but the crushing sentences that took away the lives of those young men while they're at Leavenworth for decade upon decade upon decade.
And that's why myself and my co-author were very emphatic about doing clemency for all 110 convicted soldiers. These soldiers, when they were at Leavenworth, signed a petition to the Judge Advocate General in 1919, and they signed themselves the members of the former 24th Infantry. They were still a band of brothers when they were at Leavenworth, and they conducted themselves that way the entire time they were incarcerated. So I think my feeling was that the clemency action could not leave any of them behind. And we've been lucky that we've had the support of the families, the members of the former 24th Infantry. They were still a band of brothers when they were at Leavenworth, and they conducted themselves that way the entire time they were incarcerated. So I think my feeling was that the clemency action could not leave any of them behind. And we've been lucky that we've had the support of the families, and not only the support of the soldiers, but we have had the support of the granddaughter of one of the police officers who was killed that night as well. We've had the support of over 30 general officers who are retired, including several former Judge Advocate Generals of the Army, Navy, and Air Force. We've had the support of a retired group of African American judge advocates who all support the clemency action before the Secretary of the Army. And the Secretary of the Army received our petition And then in December of 2021, we submitted an addendum. And in January, the Secretary sent the petition to the Army Board for the Correction of Military Records for an expedited review. It normally takes 18 months for them to even look at it. They finished their review in May with a recommendation back to the Secretary. And from what we've been told, the decision memorandum is on the way to the Secretary's desk as we speak.
Wow.
As we began working on this together only a few short months ago, knowing that it's the 105th anniversary, I knew that it was really important to bring us together now, but I didn't know who to bring together. I knew some of you, but we are really at a juncture of history that started 105 years ago. But you here tonight and online, you are witnessing the first time that this information is coming forward in this holistic way publicly. And I think it's just so profound and quite an honor to be on stage with you and to be on stage, with those that we were on with earlier, and to be in the presence of so many of you who are working on this and in the background as well. So my sincere thanks to all of you for committing your lives, committing your time, committing your passion to this.
I have to mention about Professor Korn. Captain Matthews and I were in a meeting with some of the members of the NAACP, and we were talking about the legal aspect, what can we do? And Professor Korn was very military and it's very cut and dry. The men committed an act of mutiny. They were insubordinate and this, that, and another. And I asked him, I said, if the military felt that they were correct in what they did with the execution, why did they create General Order Number 7? And his head went. And that's when he called Drew. We had the energy, we had the emotion, we felt we were on the side of right, but we didn't have the language the military speak to get this out. And that's how we're at this point where we are.
There were a number of other things that took place during the time of the execution. I remember now, this took place on August 23rd, and on December 11th, they were being executed at 7:17 in the morning with no one around, built on a gallows that was built within a very short, 24 hours, they built the gallows, and shortly after they hung these men, they burned them, correct? So that's a part of the system, part of the history that also indicates that perhaps they weren't really right in what they were doing. To build this, no notification. One of your great uncle, I think, somebody sent a letter home and said, by the time you receive this letter, I will already have been gone.
Yes, that was my great uncle. He said, Mother, when you read this letter, I'll be in glory. I'm dead.
Yeah, and there was also a letter from PFC Thomas Hawkins, pretty much saying the same thing, but I just know we were having dinner the other evening, and Angela reminded me that there was a pledge that was signed by the men who were executed that was brought about through the YMCA. And I happened to find it last night when I was reading through a few things. It's three.
You know, he comes up with so many things out of that coat pocket. Man, oh man. I'm going to ask you to pull out 6 numbers for the lottery in that pocket, too.
If I had them, I guess we'd be in a different position. My kids who are sitting there would be happy. So this is how it goes. I hereby pledge my allegiance to Lord Jesus Christ as Savior and King, and by God's help will fight his battle for the victory of his kingdom. So when they were being executed and they were being hung, they snapped to attention in defiance of the order of execution.
What more can all of us do? Council member Kamen made a good point about saying that the work that you've done, all of you have done, has gotten to this point? Is there something that everyone else can do? Maybe not necessarily about this, but maybe so, and beyond, on other kinds of things. Some of you have alluded to there's some injustices that are still going on in this country that perhaps we can take a lesson from the kind of dedication and perseverance that you have had to put this forward to this point. Is there anything else that individuals can do, or just stand by and wait for what we think is going to be an announcement, and how soon might that announcement come?
I think one thing I've learned by doing this petition, which is, it's a hefty tome, and there's a significant portion of this that was produced by a law student who went through the record on her own time. You know, a lot of the research for us was done by volunteer researchers, many of them former military, retired military, who went into the archives during the week or two they might have opened during COVID. You know, I had librarians from South Texas College of Law, but also other people who moved to California and went into archives there for us. So when you have a passion or a cause, even your individual actions can change the world. And sometimes, as, don't remember who said it, I think it's the only way we can change the world. So I would encourage you to read more about what happened in Houston in 1917. The petition and the addendum and all the supporting data is on the digital collection at the South Texas College of Law Library. It's available for you to read. You can check our hundreds of footnotes. It was important to us to make this based upon the law in 1917. It's not revisionist history and it's not revisionist law. These soldiers were deprived of their rights that they were due as soldiers of the United States Army in 1917. When we came here to give the petition to the General Counsel, we met with Mitch Stevenson, who's a local activist and artist in Houston. And we told him what we were doing and what we had found. And he had talked about how often the military is an important way, especially for our African American citizens, back then and now, to advance in society and to be treated fairly. I mean, the military actually desegregated before the rest of society desegregated because of Truman's order. And for him, he said, if the politicians fix this, it's politics. But if the Army fixes it, it's justice. And that's what we're hoping is going to come out of this, having the Army fix it and it being justice.
So, just before I talk to you, I was a history major in college before I became a sociology major, before I became a broadcasting major. I had a tough time making up my mind, but I was really involved. I love history. And I think back to, this all happened in August of 1917. My father was born in January of 1919, and he went on into the military for 30 years. But the same sort of scenarios that you talked about, how your uncle was talking about getting in and getting that medical, getting those kinds of things. That's what he did. As a kid growing up in Arkansas, the military was a way to get ahead in the best way he knew how. But when he got out, well, actually, he stayed in 30 years, but everything around him was not changing. And Texas, back in 1917, was horrific for African Americans, whether they were in uniform or not. Your history showed that, has it not, in terms of the kinds of things that were being endured by those soldiers at Camp Logan?
So when you said, what can we do? I have a question for everybody here. If you were in Texas in middle school, how many of you heard about any of this in your Texas history class? Yeah, right? And so maybe that's one of the things we can all do as citizens, is demand that children coming up behind us hear the real story of what life was like and what Texas history is.
Well, history is a big topic right now, not only for us in this state, but in this country, about what should be taught and how it should be taught. History is truth of what has happened and the challenges to make sure that that truth can be brought to light, one of the challenges anyway. So what you're doing now is a part of news, because as soon as this becomes something that the Army announces, that quote justice you talked about, that's news that brings history forward once again, and we all have to acknowledge that in some way, shape, or form, correct?
And it's not something that's old. I mean, we had congressional hearings in 2020 about racial inequities in military justice, where you had the judge advocate generals of all the services explaining or trying to explain to their, our representatives, our congressional representatives, why some of the statistics are still not equitable racially. And I think we learn from our past so that we can make sure that every soldier gets equal protection of the law today.
Before we wrap up, I want to give each one of you another opportunity to your thoughts about what we've discussed tonight and what you think we should all take away from this going forward. PJ?
I think the individuals we have on the stage here, if you go back in history, there's a phrase that says, to form a more perfect union. And I think it's no more perfect union than to have descendants, law school representative, attorneys, conservancy, a museum. And I think as we stay united and with the one objective in mind, that we're going to be successful.
The main thing is I would like for everybody to keep in mind that nothing is impossible. You just have to keep going at this. You just have to keep the faith. Over the years, like we said, we've had many ups and downs, and this is one of those times when we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. So just keep prayerful for us, and this thing will get some justice for these guys. Thank you.
So,
I just happen to have another paper.
I'm disappointed you didn't pull another sheet out.
The thing is, as we continue to live our lives and try and get to the highest and best life that we all can live, we have to remember the sacrifices that others have made to pave the way for all of us. But for those sacrifices, I would not have the privilege to sit on this stage to have this discussion. I would not have the privilege of being in this room with the group of folks that are gathered here today. And I can almost say to a certainty that 105 years ago, the men of the 24th Infantry would never have dreamed that this would be possible, with or without the incident of 1917. Because at that time, if you talk about a conservancy, the closest thing that they would probably be knowledgeable of or have interaction with would have been the remnants of the Confederacy. So I'm just overwhelmed, and I don't have a paper, unfortunately, to say just keep it moving, keep talking about it, keep it on the front burner, make sure that everybody's educated so that the spirit can continue to rise.
Professor?
I think the lesson I've learned is that when someone asks you to do something meaningful, say yes.
I can't improve on that. Ditto. Say yes, and say yes with joy.
Shelley, final thought?
And for me, it's, we tend to be so separated these days in our homes, and get out and get involved. Get involved in what you feel passionate about. Nothing is impossible. Get out and fight for what you believe in. Get out and work for what you believe in. Get out and volunteer for what you believe in, whether it's volunteering or helping at the Buffalo Soldier Museum or the Park or South Texas College of Law or whatever it is. But you can have a meaningful role in your community, and really, bridging is what we need. Connecting will help us. And by virtue of being here tonight, we all are connecting, and that's important.
And what is the website that people can go to and get the information and go find out for themselves?
If you go to the South Texas College of Law, stcl.edu, and go to the library and then click on Digital Collections, you'll find the special collection on the Houston Mutiny, which was not a mutiny, but it has the entire record of trial, and it has the petition and the addendum and the letters of support.
So why wasn't it a mutiny? I know the answer, but I want you to say.
Because under military law, there was a specific mental intent that had to be accompanying any act, and that was to overcome and usurp military authority. And when these soldiers were ordered to fall in by their first sergeant, in the absence of any officer leadership, the battalion commander at the time had run away in a panic, and they marched out in military formation. That's the opposite of overthrowing military authority.
So, what we've been hearing is the Camp Logan mutiny. It really isn't a mutiny. The incident, the fight, the whatever.
It's not a riot either.
Right. So, that's a part of history as well. So go to that website, find out what you can. It's amazing when you read the story and understand the streets that these soldiers walked and when they went up in Shepherd Dam and San Felipe heading toward downtown for this camp that was just to the west of the city of Houston at that time. It's amazing history of what's been going on. I thank you for you being here this evening, the descendants of those who you have a particular interest to fight for, but you're fighting for all of us too. And we're fighting with you to try to make sure this history is known so we can make sure that these men who represent all of us, without them knowing it, they represent all of us, can find the justice that they deserve, after which they certainly did not get it back in 1917. So I thank all of you for being here this evening. Thank you for being here as well. And those of you online streaming, you can continue to watch this, and you'll be able to find it on a streaming site near you sometime soon, I'm sure. We'll find out from the Conservancy where that will be, but certainly we thank all of you for being able to be here. And for you, Captain Matthews, thank you for what you're able to host us here at the Buffalo Soldiers Museum. Thank you for what you do.
And yeah, Cambrell, thank you to you. Cambrell's volunteering his services tonight. And thank you to the staff at the Buffalo Soldiers Museum, the Conservancy,
Right.
and the vendors who have worked so hard to put this on. Thank you very
I will say that
much.
Dancy Perugini Ware and her folk have been amazing as well setting this up. This will be a topic on a Houston Newsmakers program in the coming weeks. We're going to devote a whole program to this topic, and I'll be reaching out to each and every one of you about being a part of that as well. Thank you, everybody. Drive safely. Stay dry.